folks, thanks for watching or at least listening to the video. It was requested that I make a little bit of an introduction here. So this is about me. I am Bennett Sondeno. I've been a 30+ year resident here in Wyoming. I have a couple of degrees. I've got undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Wyoming in plant science. I've spent time in Colorado, and I have successfully treated lifelong digestive illness with cannabis, and today I am representing Wyoming NORML and speaking about the testimony at the Judiciary Committee meeting concerning medical cannabis and industrial hemp. And I guess that's probably it. This industry is, man, it's really taken off. They're doing great things down south. They're offering excellent medicine that's becoming more and more standardized and just applicable for such a wide range of needs that we really need it here. There are a lot of sick people that could use it for a lot of different things, and I mean the safety is increasing, the packaging, the labeling. I mean it's more obvious and it's safer than Tylenol. So I will let that go for an introduction, and please enjoy, and I hope y'all learned something. So thanks for watching. Howdy folks. I haven't shot a video for a while. I've actually been doing the research for this one and waiting on some information for it. In fact, I attended the Judiciary Committee meeting here in Cody when they had it in October, and I needed to get a transcript from the state of the testimony that was given, because it troubled me. So I wanted to have a copy of everything that was said line by line so that I could research it and come back with some information to combat some of the notions that were going around. So I did so, wrote the state. They sent me an audio copy, sent it postage due, which, I don't know, seems like maybe the state would be able to figure out appropriate postage, but anyway. Got that. Did go line by line through the testimony regarding the impact of marijuana on this state and the felonization of edibles, I guess. Those were two topics that were discussed by some experts that were called in by the Judiciary Committee. I assume, I guess I don't know who requested the individuals to speak, but it was the WASCOP group, which is the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. That's what it is. And you know, they didn't call a single doctor. They didn't call a scientist. They didn't call a patient. They didn't call anybody involved with the medical aspects of cannabis. They called an enforcement group whose livelihood is supported by the prohibition that they stand for, and a lobbying group nonetheless. So that seems like a serious conflict. And in fact, the testimony that was given is, well, it was troubling. So I guess I'll get right into that, and hopefully it won't run too long, but there's a lot here, so I guess we'll see. Now, the first to speak was Shane Johnson, I believe, was his name, from Lincoln County. He's a sheriff there. He's also a member of the WASCOP group. And the first thing that he said is that people should have a say in marijuana legalization or legislation. And yet, everything that he had to say from this point on was opposing that very thing. You know, this petition isn't about legalizing cannabis. It's about giving everybody in Wyoming the option to vote yes or no on industrial hemp and medical prescription cannabis. So that's sort of disingenuous. Then he says that, we have to be careful about our sources of information and data. And that's really troubling because their singular source of data on this topic is the HIDA report. That's the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. Now, this is a group out of Colorado that is headed by a man named Tom Gorman. And this individual is a drug warrior, spent 30 years as a drug warrior before retiring just so he could head up this Rocky Mountain HIDA. Well, okay. Here are some of the issues with the HIDA. Okay. Now, Sheriff Johnson was unable to say anything about the HIDA authors or their lacking of credentials or the fact that this is not a peer-reviewed study. This is just a propaganda piece that culls information from the sources it chooses in order to get across its political ideology. So they don't even accurately represent the data that they are supposedly representing. The report says that Amendment 64 was only supported by 54% of the people. The number was actually higher than that. The report says that Colorado current voter support for REC is only at 50%, where it's actually 58%. The report says that there was a 25 times increase in crash risk based on the National Highway Traffic Safety Study. And this is the actual number. If they had actually looked at the data, is 0. It's 1. Well, it's 1. It's equivalent to baseline. So it's a highly selective report that is a perfect example of confirmation bias, where they select information that they want to get their idea across out of the total information that does not support their stance. And I mean, to compile this information, it's important to know how to handle data, because you can make numbers look like they say just about anything. So if you take them out of context, if you misapply statistics, then your conclusions don't mean anything. So it's good to have a higher education. It's good to have a scientific degree and a background in handling data scientifically and analyzing data and accurately representing data. And yet, when I spoke with Mr. Gorman, he was belligerent. He didn't want to have anything to do with me. I was, questioning what else he had published, his credentials, where he was educated. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I've had a 4th grade education or a doctorate. The data is the data. Well, but how you handle the data is determined by how you are educated to handle the data. I mean, there is a reason for things being peer-reviewed. If I just select, newspaper articles, I can make you think whatever I want if I select just the articles that represent just the opinions that I want you to believe. And that's exactly what the HIDA does. And I mean, the fact that he refused to give me any credentials, any other research papers that he had done, I mean, he was combative. I've never dealt with anyone who was attempting to get off legitimate information who was combative about their sources, about their education, about their experience. I mean, it just really felt like he had something to hide. He wanted nothing to do with me, and he just had his own agenda. And in fact, he's been criticized publicly for lobbying against cannabis from his position as a non-registered lobbyist who is also a government contractor tasked with informing on the subject. I mean, that's all kinds of conflicts of interests. It blows my mind. And Anyway, he stated in an interview that he believes that medical marijuana has legitimate value and that it should be rescheduled, researched, and made available to the needy with compassion for the sick. So, since our whole petition and everything that we're trying to do now is just about medical legalization, we might as well take that away from the HIDA rather than anything else, because if the author believes that it should be made available to sick people, hey, that's all we're trying to do. So his propaganda can just go by the wayside. Okay, so let's get back to the Judiciary meeting and Officer Johnson. And the next thing he said was that impaired driving has increased because of legalization. Well, actually, the NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they did a really big study on alcohol and drug impaired driving and crash risk. And you know what they found? They found that THC, or the active ingredient in cannabis, does not increase crash risk. I mean, it just doesn't. That's what they found. It's when you account for demographics and alcohol, the effect of cannabis on driving and crash risk is the same as baseline. So it just doesn't increase crash. So apparently impaired driving hasn't increased. Now, cannabinoid screening has tripled since 2009 to 2014 in Colorado, so I suspect that as they have experienced legalization and they are testing 3 times the number of drivers, they're probably finding more people with cannabinoids in their system. But it doesn't mean that impaired driving is taking place. In fact, the annual Colorado DUI and DUID crashes fell between 2011 and 2014. It fell from 546 to 513, which is a 6% drop, and that's also a 2.2% decrease in a total crash percentage in the state. So more people may have cannabinoids in their systems, but crashes are going down. So to say that impaired driving is increased, again, the national study as well as the Colorado data just doesn't bear that out. Now next he said that youth use has increased. Well, according to a study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health entitled The Impact of State Medical Marijuana Legislation on Adolescent Marijuana Use, use risk among youth did not increase in states that passed medical marijuana legislation. So, accounting for all of the states at the time of this study who had passed medical marijuana legislation and pairing them with similar sister states that had not, and comparing the use rates and regressing it and using scientific analysis to determine the statistical rates that they would expect based on a change in legalization. They didn't find any. So use among youth does not increase when you pass medical marijuana legislation. Just doesn't. Now, the next thing that the officer said is that use has risen. Well, you would expect that. It's a new industry. If people are pleased with it, that's a sign that, it's a good industry, that it's approved by the populace. You're going to expect more people to use it. So I don't see how that's necessarily a bad thing. But one thing that I would point out is that admitted use has increased. During Prohibition, you're not terribly likely to tell somebody on a poll, oh yes, I do something illegal. Some people will, but I am guaranteeing that there are some who won't. And then now that it's legal, yeah, yes, I do. So you're bound to see an increase in numbers, whereas the actual percentage of use may not have changed that same degree. In fact, Governor Hickenlooper, who was originally against cannabis legalization but has changed his tune, he said that most people who were not smoking marijuana before it was legalized still don't. And that's pretty much what everybody sees. The numbers are fairly stagnant. It's not like it's just taking off and tons of people are using it under recreation. And, again, this is sort of a red herring because we are talking about medical only. And he's saying that the use under recreational laws has increased, and that just doesn't apply to us. But anyway, there hasn't been any new use of epidemic under, or any new epidemic of use under recreational legalization. So. And now he said that ER visits have increased. And again, this is based on the HIDA report, which is deceptive because ER mentions have increased. Now, that does not indicate that the cause of the visit was because of cannabis. It simply means that at some point during the visit, cannabis was mentioned. The guy can be in there for a broken leg. The doctor says, before I give you this shot of morphine, are you on anything? And he says, well, I smoked a joint last night. That's a marijuana mention. Now, all of a sudden, that is reported as this ER visit having a marijuana mention, even though it had nothing to do with the fact that, his leg got run over by a dump truck or something, whatever. So there's a difference between being in the ER because of cannabis and being in the ER and saying, oh, and I'm a cannabis user and I don't want your drugs. Those are two different issues. So they're not hashed out as to which is which, so you can't simply say that more people are going to the emergency room because of cannabis. And of those who do go to the emergency room because of cannabis, you know what they do? They sit them down in a nice room, they let them be calm, and when they're okay, they leave. Because there's nothing to be done. They're not in physical harm. They're just scared that something is wrong. So that's the extent of it. Cannabis just does not damage health. It may cause fear, but it doesn't damage health. And, another issue with the HIDA report, saying that these ER mentions have gone up, it says within the report that its reporting is incomplete prior to 2013. So what's the point? They don't have anything legitimate to tell us. I mean, it's not helpful. So next, child exposure has increased. Now, this is fear-mongering. Children have an increased exposure to tasty orange-flavored children's aspirin because it's legal, but that's not a reason to outlaw child's aspirin, and that kills people every year. Just so you know, cannabis has never killed anybody, ever, but children's aspirin does kill people every year. But that's okay, because the benefits that we see from children's aspirin outweighs the negatives. So it's okay. There is an increased exposure, but we accept that as part of the risk of having that benefit. Now, that risk with cannabis doesn't exist in the same way, because although children's aspirin may kill your children, if they get into your stash of cannabis, it won't kill them. It has never happened. They may act strange, they may be scared, they may breathe erratically and their heartbeat might get increased, but they're not going to die. They're not going to be physically harmed. If they get into the candy-flavored aspirin, you may find a dead child on the floor. That's a significant difference, and that's not a reason to be fearful of medical marijuana legislation. Now, along the same lines as kids, the officer was concerned about the marketing to kids, because we see all kinds of novelty candy bars like Keef Cats and Ganja Joys and stuff, and of course only kids like candy, and of course only kids get the the joke about the Keef Cat or the Ganja Joy. I mean, who even eats Almond Joys? Do kids even eat Almond Joys? That seems like an old person candy. I don't know, but to say that because it comes in an edible form that is sweet and they make jokes about other kinds of candy that it must be marketed to kids? The most candy that I know is consumed by adults. That's all. Now, there's also concern about marijuana cross-border transport, and of course that is increased. This is a desired commodity. There's a percentage of the population in this state that desires to have it both for medicine and for recreation. And when suddenly it's legitimized just a little ways south and just a little ways north, of course there's going to be an influx. People are going to go and get what they desire, and they're going to bring it home. That's not a reason not to legalize. That seems to me like a reason to legalize. It's no longer a problem of ours if we legalize. If they can get it down at the corner store, they're not going to drive to Colorado and bring it back. So I say legalize. And again, this legislation that we're trying to bring before the people to vote on is not about rec. It's about medical. Let's get away from the fear of cross-border traffic and just legalize, and then it's not a problem. Okay, now, the officer also said that he's not against marijuana, which seems crazy because everything he has said has been against marijuana. He was called there to testify because he's part of a group that is going around the state opposing medical marijuana. So to say that he's not against it, does he listen to what he's been saying? Again, disingenuous. Everything he said is negative about marijuana. Never said anything about the positives, the people who, find some benefit from it. Never says anything about the low toxicity or, it just focuses on anything he can come up with, correct or incorrect, that is negative, but then says that he's not against it. I don't understand. Now he says that it should be studied for medicine. Well, it has been studied for medicine. In fact, it's easy to do a comparison. There is a website called PubMed, PUBMED, which is a repository for all kinds of medical journal articles. And it's public. You can go there and search it. Now, here's what I did. You can hop on and search for marijuana. Marijuana on PubMed returns 22,598 results. Man, let me tell you, that is some serious research. That's a lot of research. It has been studied. Now, let's do a different study, or search. Search for cannabis yields 14,537 results. THC, the main psychoactive ingredient or the main psychoactive cannabinoid in cannabis, 8,139. Cannabidiol, a non-psychoactive but highly medicinal cannabinoid, 1,435. Now, you can compare this to acetaminophen, which only has 18,970, omeprazole, which is Prilosec, which only has 10,845, or hydrocodone, one that, I took that drug and I hated it. It made me high. I couldn't function. I couldn't drive. I felt terrible. My digestion was wrecked, and it didn't even help that much with the pain. I mean, it was a terrible experience, and I will never take it again. And you know what? It can kill you. It'll shut down your central nervous system. It will wreck. It wrecks your liver. It gets you addicted, and if you take too much, you'll die. It's been studied by reference in PubMed, 803 journal articles worth, and yet marijuana, just the lowest one on here that I looked, cannabidiol, has more than that at 1,435. THC almost 6 times that. how can people say it needs to be studied or it hasn't been studied? It has been studied. And if you want to take a biological study, you can say that for the thousands of years that has been used as medicine and recreation and food as people across various continents on this country or this planet, it has never killed anyone. I don't even know of anybody having an allergic reaction, having a damaging health reaction. I don't know of any personally. I've heard of some folks who have schizophrenia having their symptoms worsened, and I would consider that a negative impact, but I don't know of anyone like that. I've only heard of very divergent individuals having that, so that seems minimized. But anyway, to move on, it has been studied as medicine. And it's ongoing. We're getting more and more and more and more studies done about it being medicine. And you know what? It's good medicine, and that's what they're finding. Okay, so his next statement is that marijuana is treated differently than any other medicine. And for this specifically, he's referring to the 1-year prescription. You go and your doctor says, yes, it can benefit you, so I will sign this paper, and that means you get a card which you can take to your medical marijuana dispensary, and you can buy medical marijuana for the next year. Well, it's treated differently than any other medicine because it is different. It treats such a wide range of maladies, and it does it all in a non-toxic, non-threatening sort of way. Why should there be restrictions? If there are, I don't see why being slightly less restrictive is a bad thing when you can't cite any harm. But anyway, yes, it is treated differently than other medicines. Other medicines will kill you. Now, the next thing he says is that it can't be medicine if it has rec benefits. That is, if people are using it for recreation, well, that can't be medicine. Oh boy. Prescription painkillers, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, stimulants of all kinds, ADHD, on and on. There are all kinds of drugs that are abused. Cold medicine is abused. All of those medicines are considered to be medicine by people who are suffering and use them to treat whatever they're suffering from. But they are used by others as recreation. It doesn't mean it's not medicine. So it's just a wrong statement. Doesn't sound like medicine is the next thing he says. Well, what sounds like medicine? That doesn't sound like a very educated statement. I mean, in his medical opinion, it doesn't sound like medicine. Oh no, he's a sheriff. So in his police opinion, it doesn't sound like medicine. What does medicine sound like? I mean, my medicine grows out of the ground and it goes into my body in various forms. If you want to define medicine as being a pill cooked up in a lab, then none of my medicine sounds like medicine, because I have to grind up a flower and brew it in tea to soothe my stomach, or I have to take a piece of a root that's been candied in sugar, and oh no, maybe it's being marketed to kids because it's in sugar. And I mean, what sounds like medicine? Inhalers are medicine, right? So if I have a little vaporizer pen that I inhale my medicine from, and it treats half a dozen symptoms from as many diseases, why is that not medicine? It sounds to me like he is against it being medicine. But next, we go on to the fear of it's not your parents' marijuana because it's so strong. Okay, I have spoken personally with people who have consumed such varieties as Panama Red, Maui Wowie, Thai Sticks, Afghani, Cambodian Sativa. These are things that they had in the 70s. And you know what they've said? They've been down to the dispensaries in Colorado. They've had the highest potency stuff they can get. And they say, this stuff, I wish I had my Panama Red. See, let me explain something to you. My education is in the plant sciences. So when you're talking about breeding plants, there is a genetic profile that allows for a physical expression. Now, that is limited. There are limits to what we can produce. Corn is a good example. We've pretty much reached the maximum yield of corn. All the breeding that we can do does not increase corn yields because we've essentially maxed it out. Now, I suspect that's probably what we've also done with cannabis, or we're getting really close. I mean, the percentage of THC is in the high 20s now. I mean, the world's most potent cannabis, Ghost Train Haze, came in at I think 28% at the last get together in Spain, 27 or 28%. So I mean, the most potent THC wise that you can find, we are closing in on, and I suspect it's not going to get much higher. But the thing is, anytime you have had a careful breeder, like say in the backwaddies of Afghanistan, or the closets of the Northwest, or the jungles of Southeast Asia, if you have people selecting for the traits that they desire for any period of time, it takes a very short period before you are getting those high concentrates that you're looking for. So to say that it's not our parents' cannabis isn't exactly correct, because those high potency strains have been around for essentially all of time. What they're referring to was the average. The average potency of cannabis, back pre-80s, was in the single digits, because what you were looking at was an agricultural commodity that was coming from Mexican fields. It was treated poorly, baled, bricked, sent across the border, and, sold cheaply. Those exact same strains treated in a horticultural as opposed to agricultural environment will produce much higher percentages, and a little bit of breeding will bring out the max in no time at all. And so what we're seeing now is that those higher quality forms of cannabis are more readily available because more people are growing in a more savvy way. It's not coming across the border from Mexico anymore, from the Mexican fields. It's, coming from a warehouse in this country where somebody is using a high-tech hydroponic setup, and they're doing a good job of growing high-quality cannabis. And the other thing is, if it's potent, why is that a bad thing? Why is extra strength Tylenol worse than regular Tylenol? It's not. Sometimes you need that extra strength Tylenol. Some people need Tylenol 3. They're taking Tylenol and opiates to deal with their pain because they have a higher level of pain that they have to deal with. Same way with THC. Some people want that low-grade low-grade THC medical variety that's going to help them but not give them psychoactive effects. But then you have other people who aren't even going to notice those psychoactive effects because that THC is going to work in their bodies, doing everything that's needed, and that extra strength, so to speak, is a good thing and needed for those people. So to complain about the high quality or the high concentrate of the cannabinoids in the flowers of today, it's backwards. You're consuming less plant material to get the same effect. So it's a good thing to have higher concentrated cannabis. Oh, I sort of got off there. Next. That was a lot here. Oh, he says next that the cannabis of today has been chemically engineered. No, no, no. The chemical engineering comes into play when you're talking about synthetic phonies like Spice and K2 and these other junk drugs that they've sold at gas stations all over the country that have killed people. Yeah, we're talking killed people or caused serious psychosis. I mean, there are people suffering because of synthetic cannabinoids that were made because of prohibition that would have never happened if those people simply had access to natural, legal cannabinoids. So no, cannabis is not chemically engineered. It's hybridized. Sorry about that little hiccup. I ran out of space and the video stopped, but I was done on that last point, so let's go on. The next thing that Officer Johnson says is that edibles lack consistency. Well, minor fluctuations that do not risk or don't increase risk of harm or decrease medical value or sort of that's a minor issue that the industry is working out currently, so very little fear there. Anyway, next point. He says that there are societal impacts from marijuana, and of course he's implying that there are car wrecks and broken families and these sorts of drug user negatively impacting the society around him sorts of things, but that has not been observed. What we do see, let me tell you about some societal harms, some societal impacts, okay? And these are impacts that are due to prohibition, and they are going on right now. Right now, we have families broken, people imprisoned, property seized, jobs are lost, education's denied, people are alienated, trust in law enforcement drops. I mean, when they lie to you about the harms of this drug or this flower, and you learn that, you wind up not trusting them. And then when they try to take your property over a God-given herb, you tend to not trust them so much. It's a sad and slippery slope that they shouldn't be going down. More people die if legal drug overdoses or of legal drug overdoses and suicides, and more still are addicted to deadly medications that they wouldn't have to take. I mean, those are societal impacts. Anyway, he says he doesn't agree with scare tactics, which is funny considering everything that he said, because it's almost exclusively fear-mongering throughout. But he believes that the best consequential science project is going on south of the border. And it is. And you know what? It has been so successful that the residents are in greater support of it now than they were when they passed it. Even the governor. The governor was not for it, and he is now. He said once upon a time that he would have waved a magic wand and gone back to pre-legalization, but now he says he wouldn't wave that same wand because it's turned out just fine. So the consequence of this science project has been positive, and they are happy with it, the people who are experiencing it, and there are many in this state who want it too. Again, we're just talking about rec there, and here we're only talking about medical and industrial, which is a different beast. Now, Officer Johnson says that there's no money in it, referring to cannabis. And again, here he's referring to the recreational cannabis, which we're not talking about, but since he is, that's what I'm going to reference. Now, he's wrong. They made so much money in Colorado that they had to give some back to the taxpayers. Not only that, they had to give the sellers a tax holiday because they were making too much money. They made more in taxing cannabis than they did taxing alcohol last year. I mean, we're talking $70 million from cannabis taxes versus the $42 million that they got from alcohol taxes. To say there's no money in it is absolutely wrong. I mean, unless you think 70 million isn't a lot of money. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Whew. Let's see. Oh yeah, he says that. Well, this doesn't even include the decrease in costs of enforcement and prosecution and incarceration. I mean, there is so much lost productivity when somebody gets busted for having a bag in their car and they have to go to court and they have to pay their fine and maybe they have to go to jail and maybe they have to lose their job and they can no longer get educated. Those are serious financial burdens on the individual and the state that are completely unnecessary. But anyway, he believes that the money is going only to education and regulation and that there's no net. And I would say that if all of the money being made to it was going toward regulation and education, that would still be an amazing net gain. No people going to prison, but people being educated instead. I mean, that sounds way better than all the negatives that I listed earlier. So even if that was the case, I would think that would be still a benefit, but that's not all there is because there is a lot of money, plenty earmarked for schools, and they're doing some research with some of it, and yeah, I mean, I think it's great. And Officer Johnson said that Governor Hickenlooper is against it, and he must be going off of the old information, the original interviews that were done at the time that the legalization was passed, because he was against it then, but he's not anymore. In fact, he recently came out in an interview and he praised the project's success, the money that they've made, and the lack of problems that they have had instituting this change. So he thinks it's a good idea. Now, Officer Johnson again says that the Haida report is not opinion. He says it's based on facts. Yeah, it's based on facts, but when you take those facts out of contexts and you apply them inappropriately and you use a confirmation bias that allows you to select only for what you want to show, it's not good information, and it is opinion. So he's wrong in saying that the Haida report is not opinion, that it's facts. It is opinion, and it's a poor opinion because it misuses and misconstrues facts. That gets me fired up, so I'll keep going. Now, there's a complaint by Officer Johnson that we are not able to know the level of marijuana intoxication. Now, there's a good reason for this. You're not able to judge a level of intoxication because impairment doesn't exist. And when you judge intoxication based on impairment, like we do with alcohol, which is appropriate, because when you get beyond a certain level of alcohol in your blood, you are impaired, whether you think so or not. See, it doesn't work that way for cannabis, as is borne out by the various studies, including the national studies. If there's no impairment, how do you judge intoxication? Intoxication and impairment are nearly synonymous, and people are just not being impaired by cannabis. So, of course you can't judge how impaired they are. And now if you want to talk about, like a breathalyzer being able to instantly tell if someone has recently consumed cannabis, that technology does exist and will be probably readily available shortly due to the legalization in Washington and Oregon and Alaska and Colorado and DC, and there's going to be more next year. So that technology is going to be more easily spread around. But again, that's sketchy technology because you're measuring a blood concentration where an impairment level is not established and in fact doesn't exist. So we need to get that better understood before we get all worried about being able to detect at what level it is. So he's all worried, again, Officer Johnson, Sheriff Johnson, again, he's all worried that the kids in society are losers if we rush to legalization. But if youth use does not go up, as borne out by the peer-reviewed scientific studies, but disapproval does go up. Now, that's something we're seeing in high schools in Washington particularly, is where I saw this report come out of. Disapproval is going up. As it becomes more legitimized, it's made medicine and something that you can have if you want to when you're 21, then more people disapprove of it rather than this like taboo sort of sexy image that it has when it's being prohibited. So it's not the expected response, but it's what is seen in the studies. Money isn't wasted. Educations are not compromised. You want to talk about your kids. If your kid is busted with a bag of pot, do you want them to go to jail and then not be able to be employed or educated? If you're worried about your kids, you should end prohibition. Now, and toward the end of this presentation, Officer Johnson was asked if the HIDA report was peer-reviewed, and he doesn't know. All he can say is that it's statistics. So that that tells you the level of quality of the source that this is. It wasn't well researched. It's not scientific. It's an opinion piece, and it's a propaganda piece for prohibitionists. And he didn't have an answer to it even being peer-reviewed, which it's not. Let's see. He did say, again though, that the data and the source matter, but he used non-peer-reviewed material that's factually compromised in ways that are evident to a discerning reader. So, contradictory. Does like to say that the okay, I'm sorry. I've got to make a break here. We're not talking about Officer Johnson now. I noticed that we've moved on to the second individual who gave testimony. I believe her name was Charlotte Carlton, and she represented, I believe, a mental health organization. Anyway, she said that data and source matter were important, but was using the HIDA, and the HIDA is... It wouldn't be used by people who were actually looking for a good source because it so poorly handles the data that, as I testified to the committee, if I had ever handed in the HIDA as a report of my own during my education at any point, I mean undergrad or graduate work, if I had ever handed it in, it would have failed me, or out of concern, the professor would have handed it back and said, redo this. You have so many glaring errors that this cannot be accepted. What's wrong? Are you sick? Have you had a bad week? I mean, let's get you straightened out. Or it would have just been a failure and I'd have retaken the course. So I agree, data and source matter are vitally important. That's why the HIDA is so bad. Says that, but she believes that the HIDA is the most useful source. Well, it's useful for prohibitionists who prefer biased information. If you want well-rounded or peer-reviewed or actually scientific information, don't go to HIDA. It's all negative and contains none of the actual certifiable, accepted benefits that are discussed with regulation. So it's so biased that it cannot be the most useful source of information for determining the outcome of this initiative. She also believes that it's deliberately marketed to kids. Cannabis, I mean, I've already addressed that. She's concerned about the extracted oils because they're so high concentrate, but that's the concentration that's necessary for some of these medical applications. I mean, if you want to kill cancer, you're talking about taking 1 full gram of that high concentrated oil every single day. That's a very, very high dose. Very, very high dose that they recommend you not take for recreation. And as someone who has experienced that cancer dose for an extended period of time, I can tell you, when I went down to Colorado, when I was taking that, it did not have an additive effect. The more I took did not cause more of the psychoactive effect. In fact, it caused less. By the time I got up to the full gram, it took away the psychoactive effect. I had none of that anymore. I was kind of sleepy and a little bit groggy, but I was not high, if you will, at all. I mean, it just went away. I didn't even get high when I was smoking flowers at that point. I mean, I assume all of my cannabinoid receptors were just so flush with cannabinoids that I wasn't perceiving a change in brain chemistry or whatever. But my point is that these high concentrates aren't to be feared because all it does is take away the psychoactive effect that you're scared of. It's not toxic. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to push you over the edge more than a small dose will. It's going to end those effects. In fact, for some people who experience those negative effects, the anxiety or stress from high THC at low doses, if they continue to consume it, that is, give themselves more and more doses, those effects go away. So you can, with high concentration, you can actually make psychoactive effects disappear. I was also concerned about it not being our parents' cannabis. I've already addressed that, and the issue with the concentrates being up to 90%. Also addressed that. Now, okay, she brings up a good point because she's all up in arms that almost 1 in 5, almost 20%, so under 20, but almost 20% of drivers who were tested in fatal crashes in Colorado tested positive for cannabinoids. Oh no, see, that looks real bad. It looks like you're saying 20% of crashes are being caused by cannabis. Oh no, it's causing all these crashes. This is one of the issues with HIDA. HIDA likes to take a little piece of data and not put it in context. Now, the self-reported past month use of cannabis by Colorado residents is, get this, just under 1 in 5, just under 20%. So, if you expect about 20% of the population to have cannabis in their system from having consumed it over the last 30 days, you would also expect about 20% of accidents. I'm talking accidents, not caused by anybody, but just random accidents. You would expect about the same proportion as in the population to show up in that. And you do. So to say, oh no, 1 in 5 fatalities had cannabinoids in their system, it's a total red herring because about 1 in 5 of everybody in Colorado has cannabinoids. That is exocannabinoids, not endocannabinoids. Everybody has endocannabinoids in their system. But about 20% of all of the Colorado residents have exocannabinoids in their system. So it's what you'd expect. It's not a point of fear. In fact, what you should see if cannabis was causing accidents, you would see an increase in fatalities, an increase in accidents, and the poor proportion of accidents where people have cannabis in their blood would be much higher than the average of the general population. But that's not it. It's almost equal. So that's expected, not a fear. Now, this was an interesting point that she made. So in doing the math, in calculating out the number of milligrams of THC from a single ounce of marijuana, she came up with 1 ounce of marijuana producing 347 to 413 edibles of 10 milligrams strength. 350 to 400 edibles from 1 ounce? Wow. I think if you smoked it all, I don't think you could get 350 to 400 inhalations from 1 ounce. In fact, the standard practice is to take 1 ounce of plant material, or 1 ounce of buds, or trim, or just, flowers, whatever cannabis containing plant material you have. 1 ounce of flour, 1 pound of butter, and you extract that ounce into that pound, and then you make 1 recipe. So maybe 3 dozen cookies, or maybe a pound cake, and that's just 1 recipe. And I mean, when you're making cookies like that, it's been my experience that maybe 2 to 3 of those would be a medical dose. So this shorthand math of coming up with 350 to 400 edibles just doesn't bear out in application. I mean, a pound cake, you make 1 pound cake from 1 ounce of plant material, and if you're a medical user, that's only going to last you a week. So it certainly isn't making you hundreds of doses. I mean, there's a serious breakdown in understanding here, because that's just not the case. I mean, you might be able to make that many edible doses out of an ounce of extracted oil, but a tenth or less of that as far as effective dose. And maybe some of the THC that's calculated in the flowers is lost in the cooking process, and so the actual active dose is lower. I don't know what the actual difference is here, but an ounce of plant material does not produce 350 edibles. It just doesn't. I mean, that's crazy. It's not practical. And at that point, we can come to an end of Miss Carlton's testimony. Next, the committee brought up Sergeant McCaslin from the Powell PD, and I really kind of feel like bringing this individual up was kind of shameless. They found the one individual who died in association with cannabis. Now, this was a college student who, from Northwest College, went down to Colorado, purchased some edibles in Denver, underage, illegally, I might add. So he's underage, illegally gets some edibles in Colorado, eats, we don't really know how much, but some in edibles, then has some sort of break and jumps out of a building and kills himself. Now, this is a tragic event. It's so sad when anybody dies, especially by their own hand. But to trot this one death out as a reason not to allow this medicine for people in the state is so wrong. It requires the assumption of knowing what was going on in his head. In fact, this police officer, let's see, okay, he testified that the young man, he bought edible cookies over spring break and that each cookie had 6.5 servings. He ate all of the cookie a half an hour or so after eating a single dose, so apparently he ate approximately 65 milligrams of THC if you're talking about a 10 milligram dose, and him eating 6.5 servings. Okay, so 65 milligrams of THC. I can tell you, I wouldn't even notice that in an edible. I could consume a 65 milligram edible and go about my day without any psychoactive notion that I had consumed anything. So, sure, maybe he was really sensitive. Maybe he had one heck of an experience off of this, but that's speculation. So anyway, back to this. Ate all of the cookie. Now, he acted erratically and talked to a lamp. Was physically violent. Now, this requires so much speculation. Was he actually speaking to the lamp? Was he speaking to himself in the direction of the lamp? Was he speaking to his friend in the room but looking at the lamp? You see what I'm saying? I mean, they're saying, oh, he was crazy. He ate these cookies and he started talking to inanimate objects and expecting them to respond, when we don't know what he was thinking. And then it drove him over the edge and he killed himself. How about this? I'll make some assumptions too. I'll make the assumption that this poor kid is going through college, he's struggling, he's dealing with depression, he doesn't know what he's going to do in life, he's trying to figure it out. His friends are going to go to Colorado for spring break. He thinks, hey, this will be fun, maybe I'll, try something new, maybe I'll figure something out in life. So he goes down there and, oh, we're going to try some pot? All right, I'll try some pot. Maybe this will help my depression. Then he tries the pot, and it doesn't help his depression. And he doesn't have anything figured out. And he's just angrier. And you know what? It didn't help, so screw it. I'm done with this life, and over I go. There's my assumptions, and they didn't involve the cannabis causing his death at all. And why are my assumptions any less valid than the assumptions that eating a cookie drove him over the edge when he's the only individual in history that we can reference? To use this boy's tragedy as a poster, as a soundbite, as a reason to fight medical cannabis, shame on you. That's wrong. It's just wrong. You want to talk about suicide and cannabis? Let's talk about suicide and cannabis. You know what the actual studies, peer-reviewed studies, have found? In states that legalize medical cannabis, the most at-risk demographic, that is males from, I can't remember the age, so I shouldn't quote it, but it's the 17 to 30-ish range, the not quite middle-aged range, the most at-risk group, their percentage annual successful suicide rate drops by double digits. Let me say that again. Every single year in states that have passed medical marijuana legislation, a double-digit percentage of successful suicides goes away in the most at-risk group. Other at-risk groups, the next at-risk group is the males older than the most at-risk group, and their risk drops by almost 10%. It was 9 point something percent. So we're talking about very tangible, innumerable lives saved by medical cannabis legislation. We're talking about people not killing themselves because cannabis is available. while the Judiciary Committee brings along a Powell police officer to trot out the one suicide that happens to be associated with a blood alcohol level of THC and nothing else that they can determine. So they blame the THC. That's shameless. That's shameless. You want to talk about some other deaths? Deaths? Yeah, we can save lives because there are prescription overdose deaths happening every year that drop by over 25% in states with medical cannabis laws. So when people are able to treat their chronic pain with cannabis instead of opiates, we lose fewer lives. And it's statistically demonstrable and has been done so in peer-reviewed scientific studies. Now, the Officer McCaslin says that we're seeing these things more and more, of course referencing the suicide, as if more and more young people are killing themselves, when, as I said, this is the only reference that we can find, and the actual numbers show that percentages of people do not kill themselves. So this stuff isn't happening more and more. Don't even know what he is seeing. In fact, Governor Hickenlooper references this very instance, and he says, people read about one failure of the system, a tragic accident, and they don't see the context. There are tragic accidents every day, everywhere. Accidental deaths, prescription drug abuse. Over 1,000 people died from that last year. No one cared. But if someone died from overdosing on marijuana, it's the front page of the newspaper. It would serve people better to have a sense of proportion. The sky isn't falling. People thought it was the end of civilization as they know it. It wasn't. That's the governor who used to disagree with cannabis legalization, saying, this one poor kid that killed himself is not representative of cannabis consumers. Couldn't have said it better myself. And now back to Officer McCaslin. He beats the dead horse of today's marijuana not being about like the 70s pot. I've addressed that. And he says that it's 17 to 30% as compared to single digits. And I don't know about that 30. I'm not certain they've passed that in flowers yet. Concentrates get higher, but anyway. So that was the end of his testimony. As I said, he was just there to testify about the one poor kid who killed himself and also happened to have consumed cannabis. Tragic, and it shouldn't have been paraded around as it was, because it was done so inappropriately. Okay, now after this, the Judiciary Committee heard some testimony about edibles, because they were attempting to establish a felony limit of edibles. Now, there's all of this controversy because of all of the quote-unquote cutting agents, the butter, the flour, the sugar, all of these things that are in the baked goods that are not the active ingredient, but of course get weighed when you're weighing an edible for someone's prosecution. Now, as I said earlier, the standard method of creating medibles is to take an ounce. All right, my storage filled up again. As I was saying, I already spoke about how the standard method is to form medibles with 1 ounce of flour into 1 pound of butter, and then that 1 pound of butter is used to make 1 recipe of cookies or cake or whatever. And in the instance of a cake, like a pound cake, super basic recipe. You've got a pound of butter, a pound of sugar, and a pound of flour. Right there, you're over 3 pounds with a single recipe. And I have to really compliment those members of the committee who really questioned making felons out of, people with a single brownie, because that's what they were trying to do. The original level of felony edibles was set at 3 ounces. 3 ounces, people, that's a brownie. That's a big cookie. It's not, that's one serving, and they're trying to make felons out of someone with a brownie. Okay, so then some of the more sensible members of the committee suggested making it a 10-pound limit for the felony. Well, okay. If you want to felonize somebody for having something that doesn't hurt anybody, 10 pounds is better than less, I guess, but they were shot down. So they tried for 3 pounds. Now again, at the 3-pound level, that's making a felony out of somebody that makes a single pound cake that might last them for a week of medicating. That person's not a felon. Tried to make it the 3-pound level, failed. Votes weren't there. Tried to make it 1 pound, and finally there were just enough votes. But in each case, there were enough members voting against moving it off of higher quantities that I was just floored. In particular, one of the members of the Judiciary Committee meeting, Representative Sam Crone, he told me personally, bragged about his friends in Colorado who they use cannabis and they'd offered it to him and he knows it's no big deal. And he even outed our server at the bar where we were as someone who had been busted with pot, but he helped him get off, or let him off, or whatever he did as prosecutor to get him off, because he knew pot was no big deal. And told me personally that he would vote for medical cannabis legislation and has voted against it in every instance. But he voted in each instance to keep the felony level of edibles at 3 ounces, despite knowing by his own testimony that cannabis is no threat. Makes me wonder why he does the things he does, says the things he says. I know he lied to me. Anyway, so currently they are attempting to make the felony level of edibles in this state at 1 pound. It's still too low. 1 pound of edibles is just a matter of a few days for somebody who is suffering from a disease that they are going to treat consistently with edibles. I mean, if you're talking about your grandma and her cancer, you're making her a felon. If a pound of cookies or a third of her pound cake makes her a felon, that's unacceptable. We need to either have no felony limit for edibles, or it needs to be higher. It's just, one of the members of the committee, I heard him make the comment that, boy, we need to make an example of these people, and show that, boy, it's not acceptable here. The example, what you're doing is you're making felons out of people who already live here peacefully and are of no harm to anyone else. And that's completely unnecessary. You're trying to make felons of people who come back from a weekend with a brownie from a place where it's perfectly legal to enjoy as recreation what you are attempting to felonize. Seems cruel and unusual to me. But at any rate, I hope that this video, as long as it is going to prove educational. I hope that you can accept some of the information that I have provided, and I am hoping that there are some links down at the bottom of the screen coming along here at each of the different topic points where you can click on, or at least see, the internet links to the journal articles that I reference when I make some of the statements that I make, because See, the difference between me and the Haida report is I have gone through the trouble of actually pouring through lots and lots of peer-reviewed research and digging out the actual data, including the studies that the Haida was supposedly built upon. So I hope I can convey some of that actual truth to all of you all and convince you to not just work toward cannabis legislation for the sick people in this state, but, be an example. Step out, seek out someone who's carrying a petition, sign the petition so that we can bring this to the ballot so that the people in this state can vote. Because that's the thing, this has 72% support. If you care about the people that support this, you should support it too. Look me up. My name's BJ Sondino. I'm in Cody. You can find NORML representatives all over the state. We're carrying petitions. We're trying to get this medicine, this excellent, God-given, non-toxic medicine, just medicine, not recreation, just medicine and industry, available for the people of Wyoming. Help us make it happen. Thank you.